Today's episode is sponsored in full by Heartlifter International, a 501c3 dedicated to making home and family the safest, most secure place on earth. To learn more about Heartlifter International or make a tax-deductible donation to support this podcast and its message, just hop over to janellerardon.com/heartlift-international. Now, today we are in part 2 of our remarkable conversation with Joanna Meyer, author of Women, Work, and Calling. Today we are entering into a beautiful discussion about collaboration and how if men and women can come together, stand side by side, shoulder to shoulder, heart to heart, hand in hand, imagine how we could advance the kingdom of God on earth. I want to begin by reading these beautiful words from part 1 of Joanna's book, Ignite Your Vocational Imagination. When Colossians 1 says that God is reconciling all things to himself through Christ's death and resurrection, we must take that seriously. All things means all things. Every corner of creation, from the classroom dynamics in your local elementary school to the potholes on the roads you drive, to the art that hangs on the walls of a museum downtown, matters to God and is a place for his power to work. Jesus died to save individual lives, but he also died to restore any area of creation that has been marred by the effects of sin or isn't the way God intends it to be. God cares about each teacher, lawyer, doctor, parent. He also cares about the fields of education, law, medicine, and the family. Simply put, the scope of the gospel is as broad as the needs of the world. When viewed this way, our vision for the ways God works in the world expands and becomes even more compelling. Any woman or man whose life has been touched by the gospel has a role to play in God's redemptive plan. What a thought! Through our daily work, in whatever form it takes, we have been entrusted with a corner of creation that awaits God's loving influence. I'm going to say that again. Through our daily work, Heartlifter, through your daily work, in whatever form it takes, you have been entrusted with a corner of creation that awaits God's loving influence. When viewed this way, our work becomes more than just a way to support ourselves financially. It becomes a response to God's love and sacrifice offered in service to others. From this foundation, we celebrate the diverse strengths God gave women and encourage them to develop their influence in the world. I love, this is Joanna writing, this broad vision of the gospel because it affirms every woman's work, rather than dividing us into camps of women who work in professional context or women who work at home, aka the mommy wars. Serving the family is honorable work, and it is one of many ways God calls women to fulfill his purposes in the world. But also imagine how God could be glorified through the influence of an executive who makes her company a more caring, humane place to work. The dividing line between these forms of work has become blurrier as Christian women blend their gifts and responsibilities in response to the pressures of modern life. This integration of roles reflects a biblical model in which men and women labor together for the economic, social, and spiritual welfare of their families and communities. Joanna encourages that we must develop vocational imagination, the ability to adapt and envision new ways for God to work through our vocation, remembering that vocation comes from the Latin vocatio, a response to God's voice. As our circumstances change, questions like, God, how will you use me in this place? Or how are you leading me to use my skills and resources in this season? That requires creative, flexible responses. Whether we are single professionals, parents juggling young children and part-time work, or soon-to-be empty nesters wondering what's next for our careers, we need a vision for women's work that is broad enough for the unique situations we face. We can rest in these transitions knowing that God's primary call for women and men is the same: to follow Him and fulfill His purposes in the world. Heartlifters, help me welcome back Joanna for part 2 of this remarkable conversation on women, work, and calling. What would happen? A big part of my heart is unleashing maternal presence, the power of maternal presence into every arena of life, because, oh my goodness, where would Philippi be without Lydia? We could go on and on. And it's just that we put so many limitations. And so I think that blessed alliance, oh my goodness, will be chewing on that for quite some time, because what would happen if we unleashed that kind of power here on earth?
And I think it's important to have that end goal of interdependence in mind, because it distinguishes biblical feminism.
Did you hear that?
Reflected in the pages of Scripture.
Mm-hmm.
All of that echoes with the sense of a powerful biblical femininity.
It does.
That we can celebrate, but that it doesn't exist independent of men. There's that sense of the end goal is collaboration.
It is, because I don't need to be more powerful
relationship together.
Yeah. It is all about the relationship. And I guess that's where I, came to disagree so much with, what was presented in the Barbie movie, in the sense that it's like, I am all about, you are all about women and men coming together, standing shoulder to shoulder, heart to heart, because what would happen if we did that?
Yeah. There's some great laughs in the Barbie movie, some things I found provoking, but that piece was missing, the idea that the end goal is of collaboration. Because to me, the end goal would not be laughing at Ken and putting him back in his place, like you see in the movie. It would have been actually the redemption of gendered brokenness for both Barbie and Ken, and the restoration of a unified relationship. And of course, that's if a Christian was rewriting the Barbie movie.
That's right. But that's so well said, Joanna.
Maybe somebody would want to make that movie. And that's an area, I think that's a unique voice that Christian women can have in this conversation. It also means that we are careful about the language that we choose. That's one thing you'll notice at Women Work and Calling.
Yes.
We aren't male bashing at all.
No, it is not about male bashing. Absolutely not. Just always, I just really wanted to make that clear, it totally clear, because anyway, but I did. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
In John 1, we see Jesus came from the Father filled with grace and truth. And so it means that we can have hard, honest conversations. We need conversations that often haven't, women in faith communities haven't been allowed to, but that there's a measure of grace to it too. We realize that the brokenness of life and the goodness of God in the midst of this.
And I think the undercurrent for me, like you just said, you wanted to work yourself out of a job. Well, that's really what I want to do in my work with making women have a healthy sense of self, healthy behavior patterns, healthy communication skills, because I did not have those skills. They were spiritually bypassed over and over and over again in my walk with God in the church, and it's like, you have a voice. And over and over again, when I look back at my history, I'm like, God, if I had just known what to say. Wait a minute, let me back up. If I had only known who I was and who you had created me to really be, I would have done it so differently. So differently. And that's why we're here, Joanna. And that's what we want to do. We want to raise up women of all ages to just walk in their destiny and realize their vocational power, realize their value, realize their worth and their dignity. And then I'll be out of a job as well. And you will too. And that'll be just great. But I can't let you leave. I cannot let you leave. I don't want to let you leave without you talking to us about imposter syndrome. That is something I haven't talked about here. I am front on the line with having this syndrome myself. Have you dealt with this? Please say yes.
Oh, totally. I wrote this book that's getting published with InterVarsity Press, and as part of book promotion, they ask you to do more writing. Like, writing the first book isn't enough. You write more.
No, you got to write 85 things to go with it.
Yeah, totally. A couple opportunities to write for some bigger publications, and I've never done that before. And so
Mm.
I've had to interact with some editors and just say like, hey, I've never done this before, and I'm really honored. I want to make a great product for you. So let's edit. Like, I welcome you coming alongside me and helping me make this thing. But that sense of imposter syndrome of like, I don't know if I belong here is real. And I think that happens for so many
Mhm.
women, and it may express itself in different ways, but it's that quiet voice in your head saying, maybe I don't have what it takes. Maybe I'm not enough.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll discover the real me and it isn't who they really want in this situation. There are all kinds of little voices inside that contribute
Mhm.
to that. And I do think
Yeah.
women experience it in a different degree than guys do. It's interesting because I think there's a different conversation around identity and confidence for men, and they
Mhm.
struggle with very similar issues. They struggle with different expressions of a similar issue, like
Correct.
insecurity playing out in specific ways. But I
Right.
think for women, imposter syndrome is one of them.
Right. And I think it's like who do I think I am? That's what I hear all the time. Who do you think you are? You can't do this work. Like you're a female, it's like, or just with anything. I mean, with anything. I've thought that about a mom. Who are you to think you're a mom? But I just really wanted to bring out in our conversation. And if you would allow me to, I would like to read what you wrote in chapter 9, if I can start with that. Have you ever doubted your abilities, hesitated to take advantage of a new opportunity, or feared others would think you're unqualified? And that would bring in, Joanna, your qualifying statements, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Let me prove to you that I'm unqualified before you do that. Decide that yourself.
Yes. Or just that need to prove yourself.
Or diminish yourself
I'm
without realizing it. I
chronically
do that all
diminishing
the time.
all the time. Okay. Maybe you feel like you don't fit in. If you've experienced any of these emotions, you're not alone. You're one of many women, from seasoned executives to middle managers to women just beginning their careers, who wrestle with self-doubt that can hinder their ability. It's called imposter syndrome. You write how in 1978, a study came out by Clance and Imes, the psychologist, with high-achieving women. And I have found this to be particularly true in my practice. The more high-achieving or high-functioning, the louder the voices.
I think it's because there's some fear driving that.
You think?
Yeah.
You think?
I got to work hard so you don't discover that I really don't measure up.
Oh, yeah. Oh, they observed that despite outstanding academic and professional accomplishments, women who experience the imposter phenomenon persist in believing that they are really not bright and have fooled anyone who thinks otherwise. Research suggests that as many as 70% of people will experience imposter syndrome at least once in their lives. Once in their lives, you write? If you've struggled with a season of self-doubt, you know it can be a daily, weekly occurrence when emotions are triggered by social media posts, critical feedback, or facing new challenges. Just speak to us about that point as well, if you don't mind. Like the challenge of being completely connected 24/7 and the social media. And I know that you speak to that in this book, and
It's a deal.
it's
It's
a deal.
fascinating. It's something I've been thinking about in my own life. Even today, I was talking to somebody about this, but there's this new technology called Canva. It's like
Oh,
online
yeah.
software that does graphic design, and
Yeah.
suddenly all of us can make our products ourselves look more artistically designed than we ever have been before. And so suddenly packaging yourself is the name of the game. It's just what you're expected to do to function. And it's just fascinating to step back and say, like, what's an authentic expression of ourselves? Like, I love beauty and I love design. And so those things aren't
Yes.
bad. But there is that place of saying, like, what's an authentic and a healthy expression of who God has made me to be, both in that proactive way of I'm going to choose to make wise decisions in how I'm presenting myself to the world. And also in the negative way where it's like, gosh, I'm paralyzed by a fear of not measuring up because I have
Yes.
some very tangible, visible symbols through things like social media. Instagrams and TikTok are a huge part of that. Or I sometimes think, I don't want to be a dancing monkey online. If that's what it takes to promote a book, it just, there are things like,
absolutely. I love that you said that.
It plays out in a lot of other ways. Like if you've ever started a new workout program at the gym, I remember I love to spin or indoor
Oh, me
cycle.
too. It's my favorite thing.
But I had to just walk up to the instructor early on in that process and say, listen, I've never done this before and I'm terribly out of shape. So I'm just going to be here at the back. I don't know the moves. Just help me when you can, but just please don't embarrass me. And that's part of the imposter syndrome. If you've ever showed up to, I can think of innumerable social situations where people are more experienced than you, and you just have to have the courage to say, I will show up in the confidence of Christ with who I am.
Is that the starting point? Is that where you encourage us? You give us ideas about tools to explore our calling. Where do we start? Okay. We've talked about a lot of things, a lot of diverse subject matter here, but the basic beginning of how do I become the woman that God has breathed his life into me to become, and how do I express that in my spheres of influence and in the public spaces in my life? Where do you want us to start, Joanna?
I'm going to offer a few practical options that stretch across a range, because our listeners may enter this conversation at different points. And so if this is the first time that you're hearing, like a biblical vision for work, one, grab the book, but I'm not going to imply that the only book that will introduce.
Oh, no, but it's a very good book. I've read it.
It's very accessible, and it has short chapters. So
I love that, by the way.
For working women, it's easy to get into.
I love that.
A theologian to read it. But you begin by just saying, like, how do I have this broader vision of work and calling? Like, that's the foundation. And so maybe that's the place that you start, is you say, Lord, help me learn. Give me new eyes to see what you have put in my hands to do. And that may be the very first thing, is just saying, Lord, help me a new way of seeing. And I think another step would be, the book is built around kind of 4 themes. And the first is that framework of how we think about work. The next one is that area of emotional and spiritual health. And so, there may be listeners that are struggling with imposter syndrome or overwork or exhaustion. There's a section of chapters in the book that deal exactly with that. And so it may be time for women to just slow down and saying, how is God shaping me both in good and bad ways through my work? Around here at Deborah Institute, we often say our work forms us and deforms us.
Yes, it does. That's
every day.
So
that makes sense. Like it's a powerful tool for spiritual formation. We talk about that, like, how do you begin to have a prayer life at work, or how do you deal with the natural pressures and stresses that you experience at work as a way to depend on God and to see him with you there. So
beautiful framework.
That's the formational power of work. And then work deforms us. And so that may be where you enter the conversation of being like,
yes,
how is my daily work misshaping my soul? How has my work become an idol? Or how am I relying on myself and not the Lord? So that may be where you enter the conversation.
Or how am I denying myself the privilege of working? Like that, just that. How am I limiting myself? How have the voices of my past oppressed me and kept me small?
That's a huge part of it.
So that I am not expressing my gifts.
Sometimes they're real practical stumbling blocks. That's the third part of the book, is we just say, there are some actual real world challenges that women commonly struggle with at work. So let's kind of dig in with those. Like, what are the nuts and bolts that can help you begin to engage your work in a different way? That may be part of it. And, we haven't talked about isolation, but one of the most common things that we see for working women is that they can often feel very isolated within their workplace. They may be the only Christian that they know there. And so that feels like a lonely place. And then in their faith communities, if you're in a place that doesn't have a broad vision for women's role or affirm women's role in public life, you can feel really lonely in your faith community. I have a lot of friends that would say that, where it's like, I don't feel known. I don't feel seen or affirmed. Goodness, I feel that way a lot in my life. So that sense of isolation can be very real for Christian women. So we talk a lot about what does it look like to really have energized relational networks and be the kind of woman of deep relationship, because that's critical. God's work flows through the network of relationships that we have. And so that's part of it. So that may be the area of application for you.
Yeah. And you talk about being relational, just really pouring yourself into relationships. And you were mentioning Dr. Nijay, Gupta, who was on the show and his brilliant book. And one of the things he said I asked him at the end, so what if you do if you're Deborah? What do you do if you're Lydia? What do you do if you're Ahunia? What do you do if you're, and he said, find others. Just
Yeah.
find others. If that need is not, and you would be able to speak while you're laughing. I love how you're smiling.
Well, I'm laughing because I felt that way. Like remember years ago, I was the first female elder in my church and I was in my 30s and single, and I was late 30s. And I was like, I'm up there in my high heels. I made a point of looking feminine and wearing heels and being okay with my age. And that was a deeply, deeply lonely experience. And I knew that stepping into the role that it would feel that way. But I know the pain of that. I know what that looks like. But I also know the richness. Like God's blessed me over the last 3 years with a group of 7 friends who are all in senior leadership in the faith and work movement. Perfect. And we meet monthly on the phone. And it's so funny. One of them's in Australia. We're all over the country. We call ourselves the Phoebes, nicknamed after Phoebe.
The Phoebes. Love it.
And we have come to be dear friends. Like I let them know I was going to be on the podcast today and they're praying for me.
Tell them hello. Tell them I love them. I love them already.
Powerhouse women.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I love that.
And we're often in spaces, where you're the only woman in the conversation sometimes. So that has been God's gift to me, but it's been cultivated over years. It's come later in life. And I think there are ways for women to find that earlier than I did.
Yes. And just in closing for the third time now, or second. So how did you manage the isolation, Joanna?
That's a real question.
Yeah. Make it really like you don't have to, but nuts and bolts here. Like you're so brave. You're so powerful. You're doing great things, but I know there's got to be the lonely.
That's really kind of you.
I think it's true though.
I think one of the challenges in my own life is I love relationships. And so I tend to have a really broad social network. My office mates joke about me and my Rolodex, just because I just love people. And so I've had to learn, and this would be a tip for my readers, like learn the contours of your own life and your own network. And so for me, that's just a uniqueness of how God's wired me and the fact that I've lived in the Denver area for 30 years. So
you have the network.
But even within that, you can be lonely because knowing people is not the same as having people that know you and are deeply committed to your life. And so I think that's been one of the hardest things about being single is that my close friends can sometimes, it's like a deck of cards where it gets shuffled. Like in my mid-30s, I had a bunch of single girlfriends who in their late 30s got married and moved into young motherhood. And so they've stayed friends, but their availability has changed. And so I've had to come to terms with like, what does it look like to find people to go see a movie with when my usual buddies are no longer available? Or who are my lifer friends that I may not see as much socially, but they're the ones whose kitchens I sit in. I think of my friends Barb and Andy Wood, who I'm a godparent to their 4 teenage kids. Oh, heaven forbid if the Woods ever die, because that never happens. Both because I don't want to lose them as friends.
I love them.
So, like their poor kids are going to get me as their step-in parent. But they're my lifer friends, and I don't see them every day, but they do life with me. And so they found out that I was speaking at a little local church recently, and I looked up on Sunday morning, and Barb and Andy were in the front row, and they were like, we didn't want you to be lonely today. Oh, I'm getting teary just thinking about that.
I'm getting chills everywhere. That is so beautiful.
Yeah. And those types of relationships aren't accidental.
No, this providential.
I feel lonely a lot. Goodness, as a single person, I have a ton of time on my own.
Yeah.
But I have had to learn in the ebbs and flows of life how to find the type of relationships that I need. And that has not been an instant process. That would be an encouragement for listeners. It's taken a lot of work sometimes. And there have been seasons, I said it the other day here at work, where I'm like, I know that like my social makeup isn't quite what it needs to be, but I'm in a stretch of work where I'm just focused so hard on what's coming
right now. You for sure.
That I can't do anything about it, but I just had to acknowledge. I'm like, okay, the balance and the relational mix isn't where it needs to be right now, but that needs to change over the next, 6 to 9 months. So
there's an ebb and
knowing
flow.
that it's a work of a lifetime.
Like the tides, right?
Yeah.
But you've made strong connections that support you. And thank you for this connection. I'm just so grateful.
What a gift to know you.
What a gift to know you. I am just over the moon. So thank you so much. And I will let everyone know how to get this book and find you and start groups and start talking, start using your voice.
We're going to have book clubs of the book. So
book clubs, yes.
Free resources to help you talk about it with your friends.
Yes. And I will give you all those connections, Heartlifters. Let's give a great big round of applause to our beautiful Joanna. Thank you, Joanna.
Thanks.
Oh, Heartlifters, what a wonderful conversation. I wanted to close with just a few words from chapter 9 of Joanna's book, Women, Work, and Calling. Overcome imposter syndrome. We haven't talked about imposter syndrome on this show, I don't believe. If I have, I've just mentioned it, but we've never really gone deep with it. And it is something I believe that all of us at one point or another feel. We may not know it's called imposter syndrome, but we do feel it. We feel insecure or inferior, or I'm not good enough, or I shouldn't be able to do this. And she writes, have you ever doubted your abilities, hesitated to take advantage of a new opportunity, or feared others would think you're unqualified? Maybe you feel like you don't fit in. If you've experienced any of these emotions, you're not alone. You're one of many women, from seasoned executives to middle managers to women just beginning their careers, who wrestle with self-doubt that can hinder their ability to lead. It's called imposter syndrome. Self-doubt that can hinder your ability to lead, or I would add, serve. Psychologists Pauline Rose Clance and Suzanne Imes introduced the concept in a 1978 study that focused on high-achieving women. They observed that despite outstanding academic and professional achievements and accomplishments, women who experience the imposter phenomenon persist in believing that they are really not bright and have fooled anyone who thinks otherwise. Research suggests that as many as 70% of people will experience imposter syndrome at least once in their lives. 70%. Once in their lives? If you've struggled with a season of self-doubt. So here's that description again. Self-doubt. That's what really is at the bottom of thinking you are an imposter. I do it almost every day, if not every day, in my work. Because I was unable to complete my full marriage and family licensing therapist journey due to many different factors, I had to go into just a board certification in life coaching. And so every day I wish I could say I'm a clinical psychologist, I'm a psychiatrist, I am a licensed social worker, I am a licensed professional counselor. It's the licensing issue for me that is always in my face, in the front of my mind, because I do feel fully capable. I've studied, I research, I work. I have spent 12 years in the trenches, if not more. And so it's every day I have to fight. I'm not good enough. Oh my gosh, you're an imposter. You shouldn't be doing this work. And I know you probably feel the same way. So if we have struggled with a season of self-doubt, we know it can be a daily or weekly occurrence when emotions are triggered by social media posts, right? Critical feedback or facing new challenges. So what do we do if we feel imposter syndrome creeping in? Joanna gives us these points to consider. It's okay to make a mistake, but keep going. If you are pursuing something you're passionate about and skilled in, making a mistake doesn't mean you should stop doing the work for which God has gifted you. Boy, I am hearing that loud and clear. Heartlifter, I have made so many mistakes, but I'm hearing Joanna tell me, keep going. Recognize the voice of your inner critic and stop those lies before they affect you. Start looking for recurring themes so you can identify and resist false beliefs as they arise. She has a whole chapter on limiting beliefs, as I do in my own book, Stronger Every Day. She says, ask for help as you pursue new skills. Collaborating with others doesn't mean that you are not equipped to do the work. Rather, it can set a supportive tone and encourage a growth mindset. As Carol Dweck, an expert on adult learning, explains, individuals who believe their talents can be developed through hard work, good strategies, and input from others have a growth mindset. We've talked a lot about mindsets here on the show. I'll put a couple links in the show notes. They tend to achieve more than those with a more fixed mindset, those who believe their talents are innate gifts. This is because they worry less about looking smart and they put more energy into learning. She suggests avoid leading with an apology or diminishing your ideas. And I'm going to add here, diminishing your value. How many times have you begun a statement with phrases like, I haven't researched this much, or I just want to add? Maybe you even apologize for something that doesn't merit an apology, saying, sorry to disagree. These can be difficult habits to break. So start by looking for ways you diminish yourself, you diminish your value through your speech or writing. Don't minimize your authority unnecessarily. Plan ahead to lead with strong, positive messages throughout your work. I do this. I am so guilty, and I am taking notes and highlighting and promising myself that I won't qualify myself and I won't apologize for not having a license or not being a psychiatrist or not being, you fill in your blanks too. She suggests, let yourself stand out. Ooh, this is a hard one. Let yourself stand out. Many women have confessed to imposter syndrome. Rejection is their ultimate fear. Yep. They allow themselves to fade into the background rather than stand out for their unique, valuable perspective. I'm going to link you to that beautiful, beautiful podcast we had quite a few seasons ago on wallflower syndrome. Lastly, surround yourself with people who can affirm the gifts and abilities they see in you. You need people who can sort through false beliefs to help you see yourself in a situation clearly. These honest rumblings, as sociologist Brené Brown calls the process of engaging shame, can stop imposter syndrome and move you toward positive action. Entrepreneur and life coach Merritt Onsa writes, if we are too fearful to try, no one ever gets the chance to open our eyes to the way that God made us. Doing so will allow you to call out strength that you see in others who might be experiencing imposter syndrome too. So our prompt this week comes from the end of chapter 9, Overcome Imposter Syndrome, from Joanna. Think of a time when you experienced imposter syndrome. What helped you work through it? Reflect on Psalm 139, verses 14 and 15, quoted at the beginning of chapter 9. How can remembering that God intentionally made you the way you are to help you combat imposter syndrome? How can remembering that God intentionally made you the way you are help you to combat imposter syndrome? I love this. And her final suggestion, do you have someone in your personal or professional network who affirms the gifts they see in you? What is one thing they have said that sticks with you? There you go. Please meet me over on Instagram at Janelle Rairdon, or over on, drumroll please, our new Substack. All the links are in our show notes, so please just go there and grab all your free goodies and meet me so that we can keep this remarkable conversation going.
Thanks for listening today. It was great having you here. For even more great content and resources, please join the Stronger Everyday online community at JanelleRairdon.com. Always remember, you, my friend, have value, worth, and dignity.